Every year, we see hundreds of new watches released. And if you're anything like me, it's almost impossible to keep up with all of them. Most are simply new dial colors, they're slightly different case materials, or limited editions that kind of disappear almost as quickly as they were announced. But every once in a while, there are a handful of releases that come along that tell us something a lot bigger. They kind of tell us where a brand maybe is headed, or they tell us what manufacturers think collectors will actually want. And maybe most importantly, they also tell us whether or not these companies are listening, because there's a lot of criticism out there in the watch industry, but what actually happens on the execution side doesn't always match up. So over the past few months, there have been several releases that genuinely caught my attention, and not necessarily because I want to buy every one of them. I've talked about the ability to admire a watch from a distance and not need to own it. But because I think that they say something really important about the overall direction of luxury watchmaking, what I want to do today is share my thoughts on each of them. So throughout the video today, I'm going to share specifications, pricing, what stands out to me about each of these releases, and also what I think each one tells us about where these brands and the industry as a whole are going. Now, my name is James. I'm a watch enthusiast, a watch collector, and an advisor. And my goal for you is that you come to know and love your watches. So if you enjoy this type of content, like the video and subscribe to my channel because you will see new content like this every week. And check out the description below for a whole lot more watch collecting topics. Now, as we get started, it's wrist check time. So today I'm wearing my Omega Good Planet from 2016. Now, as many of you know, I've been wearing this watch as kind of my sports piece. It's fantastic in titanium, a lacquered white dial, a lot of blued applied indices and text on the dial. I really love the legibility here, the versatility, and I just am loving this watch. I finally got the right size strap, so I'm wearing it on this lovely kind of canvas and leather factory strap. So let's start with what is probably my overall favorite release of everything that we are going to talk about today. And that is the Girard-Perregaux Laureato 50. So Girard-Perregaux recently introduced this collection, which is just celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Laureato. So if you've been around the industry for a while, you know Laureato. You've seen many different iterations of it, everything from kind of more regular, normal dials with the typical hobnail pattern to things like the Tourbillon 3 Gold Bridges series, right? Where it's a Laureato, but there's just incredible amounts of beveling and just the craftsmanship there is spectacular. Now, there were two things that caught me on this. One is the dials. So two models particularly just grabbed my attention. One was the blue Grand Faux enamel dial. Normally on the Laureato, you just have, again, a hobnail pattern. It's beautiful. There's no doubt about that. But sometimes I feel like it's just lacking a little bit of something because so many of their dials look exactly the same with that pattern, even though they've changed the colors up a bit. So the addition of enamel on the blue dial version of this was absolutely unexpected from my perspective and super fantastic. Now, the one that really surprised me though was the rose gold dial version because I'm not typically someone that likes a flashy dial, but the way that they got this one to look with the hobnail pattern, again, Clou de Paris, it's kind of their signature pattern on the dial, but it's actually rose gold and it's reflective and it's luminous and it is absolutely beautiful. So those were two of the dials that caught my attention. The other thing that I thought was really interesting here is that they also did them in smaller case sizes. So not only can you get a 39 millimeter version of these watches, they also offer them in 36 millimeters. Now, as someone with small wrists that's really trying to find watches that size better for me, these were really interesting and I'm appreciating where Girard-Perregaux is going with this. Now, both of the 39 millimeter watches, obviously 39 millimeter cases, they are just under 10 millimeters thick. They have a very wearable integrated bracelet. If you've never tried on a Laureato bracelet, I would highly recommend it. They are very comfortable and very solid. Rolex bracelets are one thing. They just have a real rigidity to them, and I will always give credit for that with Rolex. But Girard-Perregaux just has a little bit more of a luxurious element to their bracelets, and I do really appreciate that. 100 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal on the front and the back, and they're also powered by Girard-Perregaux's newly released in-house GP 01800 automatic movement. So the movement runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour, or 4 hertz, which is pretty standard. It does offer a 54-hour power reserve, and then it also features beautiful finishing on the back of the movement, given that it's brand new. So you've got a solid gold oscillating weight, Geneva stripes or Côte de Genève. The bridges have really nice beveling, and they are finished to the level that I'd expect from a manufacturer with GP's history. Now, pricing comes in around the mid 20,000 range, which is going to vary depending on which reference you go with. So I do think that they're a little pricey still. However, I want you to think about this. If Patek or AP released one of these watches, I want you to think about what would be the price point of those pieces. I guarantee you they would be at least as costly as they are from Girard-Perregaux, probably way more expensive than that. Let's just be real. And then, of course, they would be impossible to get. So you'd have people paying multiples of them just to get one brand new, because you'd have to buy it secondary because you couldn't get it. So I do think that even though they're a little pricey for an integrated bracelet watch, I do think what you're getting with the dial and the brand new movement, I think what Girard-Perregaux is doing is they're starting to actually be valuable enough to command the price premiums that I think we're seeing from them. And I'm excited about where that's going to take them, because I got to be honest, I really love Girard-Perregaux, and I just appreciate what they're doing with their watchmaking, kind of showing a little bit of their ability to punch their weight. Now, again, if you've watched this channel for a while, you know I have a soft spot for GP. I owned the 1966 Orion for a decent amount of time, and even though that watch ultimately is leaving my collection, it gave me a real appreciation for just how capable GP is as a manufacturer. You know, they're one of those brands that serious collectors have respect for. And at the same time, they rarely generate the same level of excitement as brands like Rolex or Patek or AP. And honestly, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for them. What I like about these Laureato 50 models is that Girard-Perregaux did not chase trends here. There's no jumping hour Laureato, right? That's like a super hot trend right now. They didn't try to make the watch louder. They didn't even add any additional complications. They just simply refined an already strong design. The Laureato is a strong design. Again, it's been around for years, decades, and there is some level of recognition for Girard-Perregaux with the Laureato. I think the enamel dial is genuinely beautiful. The rose gold version has an understated warmth to it that just, to me, feels incredibly elegant. And the proportions are excellent. Again, I'm super happy about the 36 millimeter case sizes, because that tells me that, hey, I could have a shot one day at wearing something like this and have it not be massive on my wrist, which is the case for most integrated bracelet pieces. And perhaps just importantly, they've addressed wearability with an updated bracelet and clasp. So to me, this feels like Girard-Perregaux really leaning into craftsmanship rather than marketing. I do think they need some help with marketing. You know, they're starting to get better at this. I've talked about it before, but I do think that they're starting to get a little bit more notoriety, a little more appreciation, and I think that's well deserved, because they are just awesome as a manufacturer. And if someone asked me today what integrated luxury sports watch I would consider outside of, again, your obvious choices like an AP or a Rolex or the overseas from Vacheron, this would absolutely be on my list. And to me, that tells me that Girard-Perregaux understands exactly who their customer base is. You know, they're not trying to win Instagram. They're not trying to impress a bunch of fancy collectors or be in the hype conversation either. They just are true to their roots, and they're refining and bringing out new and interesting dials, and I'm more than excited about that. Next, let's talk about Grand Seiko. And today we're not going to talk specifically about an individual watch, but we've got to talk about their redesigned models that they have just brought forward, because they have introduced finally a micro adjustment clasp across all their new releases. Now, you've watched this channel. I praise Grand Seiko all the time. I have owned several of their watches. I absolutely love their dial work. The case finishing is fantastic. Spring drive is just next level all around. And at the same time, I will say that their bracelet has been okay. I haven't really critiqued it in the same way that I think some other collectors will, because I do think that they're just saying, well, all these other brands have a micro adjust. Why can't you have one? I've not been in that camp at the same level, because I do just think they make beautiful watches. That's good enough for me. And the bracelet was not poorly made either. But I think just because it lagged behind where competitors were, they were having that challenge, right? Because it was kind of behind from an ergonomic standpoint for collectors. When your wrist is changing a little bit throughout the day to day, micro adjustment is not a luxury anymore in most collectors' eyes. I think it's something that many collectors now come to expect, especially at the price point of Grand Seiko. You're talking somewhere in the ballpark of $10,000, right? So the thing I'm excited about is Grand Seiko appears that they have listened. Now, that may sound like a small detail, but I actually think it's a very important one. So one of the things that I always tell collectors is that luxury is not only about the finishing. It's not about the dial. It's not about all these things. It's really about the experience of the watch. I think that's a big part of it. Just how it feels to wear. How easily can you adjust it? How easily can you size it to your wrist? And how enjoyable is it over the course of the 8-hour day? I've used that example before. And Grand Seiko, to me, has always excelled in craftsmanship. They've just been incredible in that space. So to me, they're beginning to close the gap on usability as well. And to me, that's a very encouraging direction. So what do we have ultimately? We've got several of their dial variants, everything from the Lake Sua to the white birch, and many of them reintroduced in the same material. So mostly in steel. There's a couple in titanium, many of them still in 40 millimeter case sizes. They are now UFA calibers in many cases. So you're getting not only spring drive, but you're getting also more accurate spring drive. Some of them still are released as high beat calibers, so 36,000 vibrations per hour. But again, the biggest thing is they've added that micro adjustment clasp, and they also do have a couple that were released in 37. So if you have, again, smaller wrists, to me, 40 has always been pretty wearable from Grand Seiko, but if you do have smaller wrists and you want something smaller, you're going to have that as an option as well. So I personally have always loved Grand Seiko. It's one of my favorite brands. And I do think this is going to be a great way for them to start to really undercut, as I think they have been undercutting some of their Swiss peers, because the reality is the pricing is just so much more affordable. Even when you compare Grand Seiko to a brand like Rolex, they're comparable. But when you can get a Rolex at retail, that is, right? So if you're getting even a Datejust of some kind, right, which is a little bit more along Rolex's kind of entry-level model, you're still going to be paying more than Grand Seiko, and you're also not going to be able to find a Datejust in titanium. So I think some of the titanium models that they've released are a really strong play, and I think they've updated a couple of the dials to look very beautiful. So I'm excited about where they're going to keep going as they evolve, but I'm excited about the micro adjust being added on. I think Grand Seiko is in exactly the right place to capitalize on where the market is right now. Now, next up is Breguet. And I think that Breguet is one of the most underrated brands. I don't talk about them a lot because, candidly, most of the time their design language is not necessarily what I love. I mean, I appreciate the artistry in their watches, but the designs have not captured my love and my attention anywhere near as much as some of the other brands, right? But I do think that their recent releases are interesting. So they recently introduced smaller tourbillon references. And in my opinion, these feel much more faithful to the company's heritage than many oversized, complicated watches that we have seen over the last decade. To me, that's one of the most frustrating things from a brand, is when you get some insane level of artistry and craftsmanship and artisanal work on the dial or the finishing. And then you get it in like a 43 millimeter case. Because again, for someone with my wrist size, that is like the death knell of ever being able to own any piece like that. So I am really excited about the fact that they're sizing these down and they're making them look quite nice. Now, I haven't seen any blue dials yet as far as what their releases have shown, but I like the design direction that they're going in because I'm seeing a little more symmetry, a little more harmony on the dial, which I don't know, Breguet for me just tends to be one of those brands that it's like, there's a power reserve over here, there's a small seconds over here, the dials, not like they're just kind of weird and all over the place in some cases. So I like that they're normalizing this a little bit and focusing on the design as well as the technical innovation of it. So with these releases, we're talking about precious metals involved. We're talking about some hand guilloche on the dials, beautifully finished manual wind tourbillon movements. And again, case sizes that return to kind of those more elegant proportions rather than the ones that try and dominate your wrist. Now, pricing, on the other hand, is unsurprisingly deep into six figures. So I also think no one really expects to buy a Breguet tourbillon for cheap, but that's just the reality of where they're at. Now, again, the other thing is we don't buy a Breguet because we want anyone to recognize it, right? I think Breguet would be at the top of the list in terms of unrecognizable brands. But it's more about what Breguet and the brand represents. Abraham Louis Breguet changed watchmaking forever. And I actually think these releases honor that history incredibly well. There's a confidence in producing something this restrained. And to me, it says the brand isn't trying to chase trends. They're really trying to make the best version of themselves. And I wish more brands would do exactly that, kind of in the same way as what I talked about with Grand Seiko, that they're just bringing these revised pieces into their collection. I'm sure some of the collectors who owned some of those prior ones might be a little upset about it, that now they have to go out and get another Grand Seiko. But it is what it is, and I'm excited for that direction. Now, if there is one watch on today's list that fascinates me from a purely engineering standpoint, it would absolutely have to be the Vacheron Constantin Traditionnelle Twin Beat Perpetual Calendar. This was a watch originally released a few years back. It was not a popular watch. It was not really talked about that much. There were some articles and things that people wrote about it because it was interesting. And so here is the concept behind this watch. So this watch uses two separate balance frequencies. So basically one runs at a traditional high beat rate while you're wearing it of 5 hertz, and then the other operates at an extremely low frequency when the watch is sitting in your watch box or on a static surface. The result is a perpetual calendar watch that can continue to run for around 65 days without needing to be reset. So just think about how incredible that is. I mean, there are a couple others out there that have tried this in different ways or found ways to do it, like the FP Journe Elegant, for instance. But just think about how incredible that is. Most perpetual calendars stop after 2 to 3 days. Even my JLC is like a 70-hour power reserve. This thing can sit for over 2 months. Now, is that practical and necessary? Not really. I mean, you can use a winder. There are plenty of ways to keep it running. But is it brilliant? Absolutely. And I think sometimes watchmaking isn't about solving a really practical problem that people have. Sometimes it's just proving what is mechanically possible. And that's exactly what this watch represents. Even if I never own one, and realistically I won't, but I absolutely love the fact that someone decided that this is an engineering challenge that was worth solving. And that to me is what high horology should be. And that's one of the reasons why I think Vacheron Constantin is one of the most capable luxury companies out there in the watch industry today. So as far as the specs on this watch, nothing out of the ordinary, right? It's 42 millimeter case diameter, just over 12 millimeters thick, and 30 meters of water resistance. So something that you would probably expect for a watch like this. But again, I just appreciate that Vacheron is continuing to innovate because we need more innovation in this space. And Vacheron has been one of those companies that has over and over again proven that they have that level of watchmaking ability. So I think that's really cool. Now, let's move to something that almost couldn't be more different from that last watch we talked about. This is the latest addition to the Citizen collection. Now, whenever I talk about Citizen, I think people assume that I'm referring to entry-level watches, but the Citizen sits in kind of a very different category than the rest of what you would expect from the brand. So we're talking about beautifully finished titanium cases. We're talking about hand-assembled solar-powered movements. We're talking about annual accuracy measured in a few seconds per year, and you get exceptional Zaratsu polishing, which, again, is similar to what you would find on a Grand Seiko. You get awesome dial work, and really you get prices that are remarkably reasonable considering what you're getting. Now, would I choose one over a Grand Seiko? I do think it depends a little bit. It depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you really value the roots of Japanese watchmaking and you're looking for something that is mechanical, like spring drive or, a high beat, Grand Seiko still has that market. And I think they are better than anybody else at what they do. Just the light play that you get on the hour markers, the amazing dial work, just all those things. So I think that's pretty great. But if you're someone who's newer into the industry, or even if you already have an extensive mechanical collection, and if you're looking for something that's just super wearable, easy to throw on, and you don't really have to worry about, Citizen could be an awesome place to go with your collection. So I definitely think Citizen deserves to be in this conversation. Now, what's interesting to me is that Citizen doesn't seem interested in pretending that it's Swiss. They're embracing Japanese engineering here. They're embracing practicality and precision. And there's something very refreshing about that. In a weird way, I think Grand Seiko is also doing this. So even though they're different companies, but both Japanese, and they both are really pursuing that precision that's becoming a conversation right now because of UFA from Grand Seiko. So again, there's something refreshing there. Not every luxury watch needs to be mechanical. And candidly, not every luxury watch needs to cost $5 or $10 or $20,000. Sometimes making the very best version of something practical is impressive in its own right. So again, with many of these, you have a 40 millimeter case size. They do offer some that are a little bit smaller, and you get 100 meters of water resistance. The movement includes essentially a quartz perpetual calendar. So you do get a lot of functionality and bang for your buck on these, considering that you're talking probably between $3,000 and $4,000. And if you find these pre-owned, which you can, you're talking about sub $3,000 for a titanium watch that can do all of those things and looks great. Hard to beat that in a conversation where you're talking about value. Now, finally, let's talk about Jaeger-LeCoultre. As many of you know, if you've watched any of my content, JLC is one of my favorite brands in all of watchmaking. So naturally, I was interested to see the latest additions to their collectibles program. So rather than introducing another dial variation or limited edition, something like that, Jaeger-LeCoultre continues to restore important historical references from their archives. And then what they do is they authenticate them, they service them to factory standards, and then present them almost as museum quality pieces that are available for collectors. Now, you might kind of look at this and say, well, okay, what, they're taking old watches and just like servicing them and then putting them out there. Yes and no, because these have actually been really difficult to get for them. So they're finding some of these pieces from a plethora of different places, and they're only taking in really high quality models. I almost think of this as like Rolex CPO in a way. It's like it's got to meet some quality standards to start for them to even consider wanting to take it in. And then once they take it in, they're doing a whole lot of work to get that thing running again and making sure that it's up to a standard that they can resell with, a great restoration and a warranty and all those things. So that's really, really cool that Jaeger-LeCoultre is doing this. So to me, this strengthens the brand in a way that another new sports watch never could. Although at the same time, I'm still waiting for the next chronometer to be 100 meters water resistant. So JLC, if you're watching, just make that update to the chronometer and you will have a fantastic sports watch. But again, when you celebrate your history, you remind collectors of why your company matters in the first place. Very few manufacturers have a history that is as rich as JLC. And everything from movements supplied to countless prestigious brands to really cool inventions like the Reverso, having the turnable case, and the Atmos clock, which basically functions off of very slight temperature changes in the atmosphere. There's just an incredible archive for them to draw from. I would much rather see them invest in preserving that heritage than chasing whatever happens to be trending this year. I think it reinforces exactly why so many serious collectors continue to respect the brand. Yes, I do think that their new Master Chronometer series has some work to do, again, to get water resistance, to get some lume, to just be more of an all-around everyday watch. But I do like that they're continuing to go in both directions here, you know, with the Hybris Artistica pieces that they released, and also they're doing something that's a little more historical and based on their heritage. So just another reason why I love JLC, and they're continuing to kind of capitalize on that. So as I step back and kind of look at all these releases together, I noticed something interesting, and that is that none of them feels like it was designed primarily for social media. It just feels fresh. They feel like they were designed for collectors. Again, Girard-Perregaux is refining rather than reinventing. Yes, they've been bringing a lot to the table, new movements, new dials, but they're refinements of what they already have. And Seiko, again, they're listening to the feedback that they've been getting from the market for a long time, and they are revamping some of their collection to include the micro adjustment. Breguet, they're embracing their classical roots of watchmaking. Vacheron, continuing to push those technical boundaries that are out there. Citizen, doubling down, precision and practicality, and that's it. And JLC is celebrating its heritage and I think being creative in forward looking. So to me, I think those are all encouraging signs. One of the themes that I've talked about a lot on this channel over the past year is intentional collecting. You know, buying fewer watches, buying better watches, and being more selective, you know, buying watches that mean something to you. And in many ways, I think these brands are moving in that same direction. You know, they're becoming more authentic rather than just becoming louder. And I think if that's where the luxury watch industry is headed over the next 5, 10, 15 years, I do think collectors have a lot to look forward to. So yes, there are still pieces that I'm waiting for to be perfected from some of my favorite brands before I'm like, yep, sign me up for it. But I do think that we're moving in the right direction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which one of these releases stood out most to you as they came out? Is there one you'd actually buy? Or maybe is there another release from this year that you think deserves to be part of this conversation? So thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you taking a look. If you enjoyed this video, definitely take a look at my last video where I talked about how to evaluate any watch in just 5 minutes. And I walk you through kind of my 8 steps for what that looks like. But until next time, thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you all next time. Bye-bye.